As Ben said, I do finish in my role as ALEC CEO in a couple of weeks' time. It's been quite a journey over the last 4.5 years. I actually don't know what life will be like without having people swear at me on social media or stalk me, a whole range of things. But look, you know, life goes on. I'm looking forward to a break. I'm walking the Camino. I start in 4 weeks' time. So I'll have my spiritual detox in a few weeks. But look, I was expecting to see a few more faces that I know, and there aren't very many. I see Mary and a few others from MLA. But look, I do thank those who have supported me and those who've taken a great deal of interest in the live trade. Look, there are a lot of issues that I could talk about today. Obviously, live export featured in the last few weeks of the campaign. I'm not intending to particularly address those issues today. That's not in any way me trying to avoid those very difficult issues that are out there, but simply that there is just so many things that I'd like to share with you today, and I had to pick some. Otherwise, we might be still here to bar closing hours, and I'm not sure that you, or maybe Friday, you might be happy to do that. So look, what I want to do today is sort of go back to basics. In fact, why do we have a livestock export trade? What are some of the current challenges and threats to the trade, and can we overcome them? Now, look. You know, just to be frank, I mean, obviously the live trade and frankly most things in animal production are confronting. Even if we operated at our best, you can't put a pink ribbon on a steer in an abattoir and somehow that process is going to look good. It's a challenging area to operate in. It's a challenging area for the community to engage in. But there are things that we can do far better than we have been doing. I do note, just before I get into more detail about why there's a trade, I do note with increasing dismay the naive assertions that the trade is easily replaceable. There were many comments along these lines during the election campaign. Many of those asserting them were people that have asserted them before, but they were amplified in the election context. You know, the simple proposition, pack them in a box and they will come. In my view, this tendency to oversimplify complex policy arguments for the trade is frankly a lazy approach by the trade's critics and reflects a worrying trend in this country. The recent federal election was a case in point with the absolutely disgraceful Medicare scare campaign, but closer to home, the vicious campaign by the Meat Workers Union and the Maritime Union of Australia against Barnaby Joyce in New England, and similarly against Kevin Hogan in the seat of Page, both New South Wales seats, in arguing that the live trade is taking away jobs in some regional centres. Very limited cattle are drawn from New England and the north coast of New South Wales for live export. For starters, the logistics to market are challenging and very expensive, with the nearest ports being Townsville in North Queensland, or Portland in Western Victoria, or Brisbane for the small specialist niche Wagyu cattle export trade. Secondly, breeds from these areas are largely unsuited to our major cattle markets of Indonesia and Vietnam. That's why we draw so heavily on Northern Brahman type cattle, and why the industry is so important to Northern Australian producers for jobs and income. At the height of the election silliness, the unions attacked Barnaby Joyce for an association with Stanbroke as a live export supplier, but which proved an own goal for the union because they failed to note that hundreds of their comrades were employed by Stanbroke at their Grantham meatworks. The election argument of convenience, of course, failed to note that the biggest threat to meat worker jobs is the cost of production in Australia, which is 1.5 to 3 times more than the cost of processing an animal in other countries. I certainly understand the concerns of abattoir workers in wanting the certainty to have a job. That's a freedom that all workers want and deserve. But the threat to that freedom is not live export, and it's wrong to dress up the trade as the workers' bogeyman. Perhaps by arguing for an effective ban on the live export trade, they misunderstand the consequences, turning cattle producers into the working poor by restricting who they can sell their cattle to and shrinking our export capacity to serve global customer demand for our quality meat. There are real threats to the future of the red meat sector in this country, but it's not live export. So, having got that off my chest, why do we have a live export trade? In simple terms, because there's a real and genuine demand for one. Consumer dynamics are far more layered and multidimensional than many give credit for. There are good and very valid reasons why live animals are traded, and traded extensively by over 100 other countries. And I note in a story that Shan Goodwin wrote today, Mikhail again, and he said this previously, that in fact the export of live animals globally is an expanding trade, but we're a shrinking part of that expanding trade, and I'll come back to that when we talk about animal welfare. So what are some of the reasons why we have a live export trade? One, I mean, clearly our proximity to markets in Indonesia and Southeast Asia, and long-standing trading relationships with purpose-built livestock carriers, and that largely for the Middle East. Importing countries of confidence in the health status and quality of Australian livestock, our regulatory certification system, and our ability to supply 365 days a year. We can provide a variety of livestock classes and breeds. Our livestock tend to be higher yielding and more value for money than competitor livestock. The local businesses in our markets not just use the meat but the entire animal for different products. Increasingly, our efforts to help improve animal welfare is recognised as contributing to wider social and ethical change, better treatment of local livestock, improved worker safety and better meat quality. Our trade supports public policy programs to increase meat and dairy consumption and endeavours of importing countries to provide food security. It strengthens breeding and herd numbers with quality genetics, supports the development of local processing sectors in developing countries. It supports a wide range of consumer and different market segments that live animals processed locally are most suited to, for example, wet markets. Processing live animals locally is often cheaper than buying boxed or chilled slaughtered meat from Australia, which is high input cost industry compared to global competitors, as I've already mentioned. There are, of course, religious requirements, particularly around festival times, that dictate the slaughter of live animals, and there's this concept that comes with this of freshness, and it's amazing. I was in a facility in Qatar, and it's an interesting facility. We have an approved commercial feedlot and abattoir, and next door is the public sale yard and public abattoir, and a section of that's actually approved under the Exporter Supply Chain Assurance System. So on a visit, we were there, a father and son came up, and the father to this pen of merino sheep in the public sale yard, approved dairy, and he had a look and a bit of a feel. He said, I want that one. Father and son went into the public abattoir and they watched that animal processed. We watched it go through. In fact, we had helped fund and to improve that public abattoir with a Viva strainer and tables and training in the facility. Now, at the end of the process, the father took the carcass and off they went home for a family celebration. Why did they want that? Why did they choose that process? Because freshness to them meant seeing the animal alive. And that's often what's missed in the debate around, well, we can just put them in a box. They'll just take them from a box. Freshness has a different definition in other markets, and that's something that we need to understand and appreciate. It's not an excuse for poor welfare. I will never make an excuse that that's acceptable. And welfare, it's a balancing act. It's not. We have to get welfare right, but we also need people to understand that people have different concepts about meat and what freshness is, and I think that's an important point. Another reason is our political stability has supported vertically integrated investment from a number of countries from destination markets. So Indonesia, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait and Qatar have all invested in facilities here to support the live export trade. And finally, it's principally about necessity for many countries that cannot produce livestock locally or sustainably, but believe strongly that affordable protein from live animals is important to the physical, mental and social development of their people. So as I said, over 100 countries export live animals, but from our perspective, the process is becoming a much more specialised skill set, and I was talking to someone a bit earlier. Pre-2011, a live exporter was a trader. They bought and sold livestock. If you ask them today what they are, they're not a trader anymore. They're a logistics manager, they're a meat marketer, they're a training provider. The job of being a live exporter is a far more difficult, challenging and specialised role than it ever was. Now that comes with a set of challenges, and those challenges are represented when you're trying to implement a system like we are that no one else has ever tried before.